Hello, dear ones. Father Peter John coming to you from All Saints Orthodox Church, Bloomington, Indiana. Christ is in our midst. Today's gospel was all about, it was Luke chapter 8, it was about the woman with the issue of blood and Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue, his daughter, who was 12 years old, who was sick and eventually died and was raised from the dead by Jesus. The woman with the issue of blood, of course, she reached out in faith in the midst of this big crowd as people were pressing against Jesus, and she touched the very hem of his garment, the very edge, in faith. And when she did that, she received healing from her chronic disease of blood loss. So there's something in just the center of this whole gospel narrative that I want to point out. And those who were at church today and heard the homily, they're hearing this for the second time, but it bears repeating because it's extremely important. And that is that when Jairus found out that his daughter had died, and Jairus' servant came and said, "Your daughter died, don't bother the teacher, the master anymore." In other words, just let Jesus go about his business because it's too late for your daughter. Well, Jesus says to Jairus at that point, the way it was translated in the gospel reading today and in most of the Bibles that we have, it says, "Do not be afraid, only believe, and she will be made well." Do not be afraid, only believe, and she will be made well. Now, that in itself is good news, right? It's very important. It's very, very important. But that's not actually exactly what the text says in the Greek. What it actually should be translated as is, stop living in fear, or quit always being afraid. And then it should say, only live by faith, or always be believing, or always be having faith, and she will be made well. Now, why is that important for us? Well, it's for example, it's not like Jesus said in this one instance, "I want you to stop being afraid, and I want you to believe I can do this, and it'll happen." That's not what he was saying. This one instance is certainly a snapshot for us of what happens when we live free of fear and we live in faith. What can happen, God can work miracles. He did then, he still does now. I've seen them, maybe you've seen them. It doesn't happen every time. You can't predict and say, well, we're going to say this prayer and use this oil, and every time we're going to get the exact same result. That's not how it works. But we are told that we are always supposed to live by faith, walk by faith, right? To be believing always in God. And that we are to stop living in fear, stop always being afraid. Now, the fact that Jesus says that to Jairus, that he says it to us, right? That seems to insinuate that he knows that we are always living in fear. So our secret's out. And when I say that, I don't mean we're all cowering and, right? But everybody's afraid of something. People are afraid of the coronavirus. I mean, people are afraid of the political situation. People are afraid of, a few years ago, the big focus was on terrorism. People are afraid of different things. Some people are afraid of their own shadows. Some people are afraid of their family life. I mean, people just are afraid, of their boss, whatever. But Jesus knows. He knows that we have this tendency, this propensity to live in fear because of our separation from God that came about through sin in the beginning with Adam and Eve, and through the sins that we have continued to commit. So this separation has taken place. It's caused this great fear, but he is inviting us back into a proper relationship of communion with himself, with his Father, with the Holy Spirit. He wants us to be free from fear because we are living in communion with the God of love in faith, that God of love who casts out fear. So brothers and sisters, I want to re-highlight that word. I want to represent it to you. I want to remind you, and anytime you feel afraid, anytime you feel like you're paralyzed by fear or living in fear, I want you to remember this, that Jesus is inviting you to believe in him in a very active way, and then to be freed, unchained from your fears. Christ is in our midst. He is and ever shall be.